Share the Load is a time to reflect on the division of labor within our personal relationships. When it comes to the emotional, manual, financial, and domestic burden, how do our evolving views on sex, love, gender roles, and power dynamics determine how we share responsibility? I'm your host, Mia Schachter. I'm an intimacy coordinator for film, TV, and theater, and a writer and educator in Los Angeles. Today, I'm talking to Yehuda Duenyas, a fellow intimacy coordinator, experiential director, and a good friend. Hi, Yehuda.
Hi Mia.
How's it going?
It's awesome.
We're doing this from home today for the first time.
Yeah, we're in Corona quarantine.
Yeah. This is social distance podcasting, I guess.
Which I'm so happy to do. I feel like I'm sitting right in front of you, in front of my screen.
Oh, and also worth mentioning, Yehuda and I grew up less than probably half a mile away from each other. But only met this past year. So when you were growing up, how did you see the labor divided in your family and your household?
It actually switched around a bunch. My dad had a business, and my mother also worked often, sometimes worked with my dad. She also had her own, my mom also had her own art consulting company for a little while, and then so they both worked, and they both and sometimes worked together, and so I feel like and my father cooked and my mother cooked, so it felt like the division of labor was actually, I'm thinking back to like my childhood perspective, it seemed kind of equal almost. I think because my father had the business, and that was more of like a steady. He was a furniture designer, and so that was sort of the more kind of steady business. Maybe like the sort of like breadwinning model kind of fell harder on my father, and this is like the 80s and early 90s in Los Angeles. So, but they both worked, and they both worked together, and they worked pretty hard to, put dinner on the table for us and for me and my brother. So I think it was like almost equal, but with like a little bit more of like kind of importance on my father's business, because he had the sort of, like the business was like the main income bringer for the family.
And as far as like, do you have a picture in your mind of like how emotional labor was divided in your family? That's kind of hard to like put a finger on.
Yeah. And something that I haven't actually ever considered. So I'm considering this on the fly with you. Long pause.
Well, maybe let's start with like child rearing duties, for example, like.
Totally. I think that would fall a little bit more towards my mother. However, my parents did this strange thing when we were born where they sort of like, I was my mom's kid and my brother was my dad's kid. It was very kind of strange and bizarre. And so I spent a lot more time with my mom, and my brother spent a lot more time with my dad. My brother's 4 years younger than me. And that was definitely weird.
How does that play out?
Yeah, it was a little strange. And like, we would have like days of the week where we would spend with our parent.
Whoa.
Yeah, like a Sunday, and it wasn't like, it wasn't so prescriptive, but it kind of turned out that way. And so, I would have like Sunday coffee, and, my mom there was this place on Robertson called Michelle Richard. It was like at the corner of Robertson and Beverly. I think it was Beverly or Third or something. And it was just this great French patisserie, which had the most amazing eclairs. To this day, I have not had a paralleled eclair.
Wow.
Michelle Richard is an old, an LA throwback. So yeah, we would go for like coffee and eclairs on Sundays, or, something like that. We would do stuff together, go to the museum. We definitely did a lot of things as a family.
Was that
but my dad, it was kind of openly talked about.
That's so interesting. So they
Wait.
decided that very
The
consciously.
quote ownership wasn't really talked about, but it was like, you're going to go spend time with your mom now. And my
Huh.
brother's going to go spend time with my dad, which wasn't that easy, actually. Like that. I remember that being like, well, I kind of want some time with my dad too. It wasn't that prescriptive. It wasn't like we were, kept apart from each other or anything like that. But it was a facet of my growing up. It was interesting.
Hmm.
I do think that probably like the child rearing stuff, from my uh, perspective and my experience fell more towards my mom.
Hmm.
And my dad worked a lot. Like he was always at work. I remember him coming home really late, like covered in dust and paint, and going on business trips. And my dad was definitely like running the business, and my mom was around more. And so I feel like it was a much more sort of traditional, um, household in that way, like gender, traditional, but traditional gender role household in that way.
Yeah. So how do you think are there ways that you can like kind of look at how the adult that you are now and the adult that your brother is now and kind of trace things back to this kind of division between your parents?
It kind of like my dad was a designer. My mom was an archaeologist by training,
Whoa.
and my father was a designer. And so, but also my mom was like really into, like I would roll my eyes as a kid, and I'm so thankful now, but like, always going to museums, and there was like a lot of culture that came from my mom. My dad was into more experiential things, like he loved to sail and, sort of be out in the world doing stuff. And so I do kind of see that. I definitely see both facets in myself. I do see that division a little bit in myself and my brother. Like he tends to lean a little bit more towards business and design. I'm a little bit more on the artistic, like more of an artist on the art side,
And
uh,
conceptual, your
and
work.
conceptual,
Yeah.
yes. And so, yeah, I think that this is actually the first time I'm thinking about this stuff. So I'm really kind of like on the fly, um, imagining this and really kind of trying to trace an outcome. And yeah, that feels pretty accurate.
Yeah. Well, that's a great lead up to. I wanted to ask you to describe one of your, how do you what do you call your like experiential
Hmm.
works of art?
Yeah, totally. So I call myself an experiential artist, experiential designer, experiential director. My background is immersive theater in New York in the early 2000s. Um, and from there, I went to grad school at RPI and got a degree in electronic arts and interactive technology. I spent some time working at Walt Disney Imagineering, working on new form immersive experiences and ride design. One of the ride experiences I made on my own personal artwork was, it's called the Ascent, and it's a mind controlled experience where you wear an EEG sensor that reads your meditative state, and you're in a harness, and your meditative state affects all of the sound and the light in the room. And also we connected the EEG sensor to a rigging system. So it actually like starts to, as you meditate, it starts to lift you up into the air and intensify the sound and light in the room. And so if you can meditate your way literally like 40 feet up in the air, you'll become enlightened and win. And then the Gates of Kiev by Mussorgsky starts playing, and confetti cannons shoot off, and this big sun lights up and starts spinning around, and
Whoa.
everyone watching starts cheering for you.
You did explain this to me, but this one didn't like this one must have just blown my mind completely off the grid. Like I don't remember. I now remember you explaining this to me, but that's incredible.
Because you've done a bunch of neuroscience stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And there was I actually had a friend in Brooklyn who wanted to I think he said he bought an EKG and he like wanted to kind of play with it. Also an artist and a theater person. I bet you
EEG?
Oh yeah, EEG.
Yeah.
Wow, it's been a while. Can you explain the kissing experience? I love the kissing
Yeah,
experience.
totally. So So anyway, I'm an experiential director, and so that's one of the experiences I made. I also work in just to finish up that thought, and then I'll lead into the kissing experience. I also work commercially as a commercial director and do experiential branded advertising, but also created a piece for the Ad Council, which was called Love Has No Labels, where we used a motion capture suit that you wear, just sensors that you wear on your body. And this was the piece with the skeletons kissing on the screen. And so you see skeletons kissing, and then they reveal themselves, and you see that it's a lesbian couple and a mixed race couple, and challenges your biases and assumptions. You see two skeletons kissing, and you have an idea in your mind of who those skeletons might be. And then they reveal themselves, and you're surprised. And so it was called Love Has No Labels. So that's another experiential example.
That one people can see on YouTube.
Yes, Love Has No Labels on YouTube, and went viral in 2015, and we got a lot of love for that.
And I believe you won an award.
Special piece. I did. We won an award we won bunches of awards for it. It won a bunch of Cannes Lions, and we won an Emmy and some other awards as well. Clio.
Yeah, just an Emmy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun. It was really great. It was a beautiful piece. And actually that same year is when the Supreme Court overturned the gay marriage rules in the country. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like in that year, there was a lot of amazing movement in, trending, good market movement in the right direction.
Yeah.
And felt like, I was happy to think that I could have contributed to that. And I felt that was really sweet. So the kissing experience it's just that we create the perfect kiss for you and a partner or partners, for you and your sweeties. And you come to our space, and we make you a magical drink, and we give you this like exquisite chocolate, like you've never tasted a chocolate like this before, just to like kind of get you in the sensual mood. We have a list of potions and elixirs that you can order, non-alcoholic too, of course. And then it created this card game, this Kiss Me card game, where you ask each other questions, you and your partner. You sit for a while and you ask each other questions, and they're intimacy building questions. An example is, describe your very first kiss in as much detail as you possibly can. One of my favorite questions is, there will come a day when you will have kissed your last kiss. For all of us, that day will come. What kind of kiss would be worthy of being your last kiss? So just really fun kind of, fun questions that build intimacy. And my hope is that if you've been together for 20 years, or if this is your second or third date, that this is going to be a really memorable experience for the two of you. It's going to build intimacy and connection. And if you've been together 20 years, it's going to re-spark something in your relationship. And if it's your second or third date, it's going to be that moment that you can never forget,
You're making me think of like, what kind of experiential art could be made right now, where we all have to be 6 feet apart. And some kind of like VR touch sensation kind of thing, like that's, I think what's happening right now that I'm thinking a lot about is like, generally we have this kind of spectrum of like single people to coupled people, like there's single people who aren't dating anybody, there's coupled people who are like married and live together, and then there's everywhere in between. There's coupled people who don't live together, there's coupled people who live on the other side of the country, there's coupled people who see each other once a week, and then there's like single people who are dating a few people sort of casually, there's coupled or single people who are like, working their way up to a relationship. So there's generally like a spectrum of that. But right now what we're facing is actually this binary. There are single people and there are coupled people, and there is no range of how much touch people are having in their life. People are either having touch in their life or they're having no touch in their life. And I'm on the extremely single side of that. And I am not generally a very like touchy-feely person with like friends and acquaintances, but I take this like dance aerobics class at Everybody Gym called Pony Sweat, and generally it's packed. And I usually get a little bit claustrophobic in there, and I'm afraid to kind of dance, with abandon because I don't want to like whack anyone in the face. And I'm currently doing Pony Sweat from my bedroom, like on a TV screen where they have us count out loud and they have us, clap and stuff. And like doing that by myself it's very emotional. And like, as much as I get a little nerve-wracked in class about how close everybody is to me, all I want right now is that like nervousness and fear that I'm going to whack someone in the face. Like I would love for someone to kick me in the shin. You know what I mean? Like
totally.
That's what I'm like really craving right now. So anyway,
it's no secret that we need connection and we need intimacy,
right.
And we need, we're social creatures. Our software, our mind software is, built on that foundation. It's really important that we figure out other ways to maintain it. So to finish up Kiss Me. So you play your card game, and then your host comes up and asks you and your sweeties to choose a song that you're going to make out to. And it's really interesting because you can sort of see the dynamics of, different couples and how they interact with each other. And so it's sort of my hope in this project to call attention to those for you and your honey, and to sort of get to a new place of communication through this. And so you choose your song, and then that's the end of Act 1. And so Act 2, you're led into this room where you sit at these two beautiful desks that you're back to back from each other. And there's this beautiful stationery on the desk and this like cauldron of bubbling wax, and a stamp and this beautiful pen and nice stationery. And the prompt is to write a love note to each other.
Whoa.
And so something that we don't really do that much anymore, which is write. And so you pen a love note to each other, and then you seal it in wax. Your host comes and picks you up and takes your love notes from each other and then leads you into that's the end of Act 2. Leads you to sort of this antechamber before the kissing room, gives you each a mint and a little zhuzh, maybe some like lip gloss if you need it. And then you're led into the beautifully designed kissing room with the subwoofer under the love seat and the beautiful sound system and the great lighting. And you sit down and the curtains close and your song comes up and it's like booming under the seat, like with the bass rumbling the love seat. And you get to make out for the duration of your song.
Wow.
And then your host picks you up from a separate door and hands you back your love notes and asks you to exchange them with each other. And then you discuss when you're going to open them. And some couples are like, we're opening this in a year. And other couples are like, I'm ripping this open in the parking lot right now. And so we've had kind of a range of when people want to open their love notes. And then we send you off into the night. The experience is like an hour. And so we're just crafting the perfect kiss for you and your honey. And that's called Kiss Me. And we'll see if it ever comes back. I feel like so much is different now. After the coronavirus, I'm hoping that there will be such a desire to reconnect.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
That there will be such a, not a backlash, but that, such a correction in terms of how, we were going to want to overcorrect because we felt so distanced from each other. I also foresee some fear in that too, though. Like when you think about like, how do we go back?
I was wondering if people are going to start being more sensitive after this to people who don't like hugs. There are a lot of people who don't like hugs, who walk through the world constantly afraid that they're going to see someone that they know who's going to just insist on a hug. And I'm wondering if this will make people a little more sensitive, or the opposite, where people are going to be like, oh my God, and, just grab people. My colleague who, I believe Jean Franzblau runs the Cuddle Sanctuary in Venice. And of course they're shut down right now, but they do such an incredible, like provide such an incredible service to the community by teaching people consent and ethical touch in non-romantic and non-sexual contexts to combat touch starvation. And I think that right now we need that more than ever, and there's simply no ethical way unless we all get like hazmat suits, and like that's just the only way that. But we're on week 2 of this, and I'm wondering
that could be its own kink, by the way.
Totally.
I mean, it probably is. Yeah.
It probably is. Or like furry out like costumes, but protective furry costumes. But I think that we're gonna see how long we're in this situation the way that it is exactly at this moment. And I would imagine that if we're still here in 2 months, 3 months, people are gonna figure out sanitary and safe ways to physically connect. I've been getting, on like online dating apps right now, like all of the apps themselves are sending out messages saying, please do not meet your date. Date on this app, do not meet in person.
Have you dated on an app? Have you connected with people and had conversations?
Like since this all started?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have. There's, I haven't dated. Someone that I had been kind of planning on going on a date with before this started actually sent me a really thoughtful and sweet voice memo yesterday. I hadn't heard from him in a couple of weeks, and he was like, hey, I haven't forgotten about you. Obviously the world is crazy, but like I was wondering if you would want to have a phone call this week.
Wow.
I was like, wow, that's like
lovely.
really sweet and thoughtful, and like, yeah. Under other circumstances, I'd be like, let's grab coffee, and a phone call would feel kind of funny to me. But yeah, I would do that.
Totally. Yeah.
But also, like, I'm going on walks with friends, and we're staying far apart, and we can't hike or anything, but we're just like walking around neighborhoods, and no one's driving, so we can stay 6 feet apart in the street. Like, I'm trying to do that as much as possible. I was gonna ask if you would feel comfortable doing that first question with me of what your first kiss was like.
So my first like real kiss was on Catalina Island. I was at YMCA camp on Catalina Island, and I think it was the summer between 6th and 7th grade. And I think I was 11 or 12, and Jamie, who was my first kiss, she was 14. And so, and she had definitely kissed before. And she was, I wrote like a really long thing about this actually. And so we were on the beach, and we'd just have free beach time. And then it was probably like a 1/4 mile walk back to our camp. And so everyone had gone back for lunch, and it was like us and like maybe 1 or 2 other friends, still on the beach, and we were kind of like laying on the beach side by side, and she's like, have you ever kissed anyone? And I was of course like, yeah, like lying. Yeah, totally. 12-year-old with this, I thought she was beautiful. This beautiful 14-year-old. And she
older woman.
Yeah, she was an older woman. And she was like, well, do you want to kiss me? And I was like, yeah. And so, we were laying on our sides on the beach with like the sun on us, and like we touched lips, and like her tongue just like, just kind of like entered my mouth like just the tiniest bit. It was like really, it was like a wonderful teacher. And it was the strangest feeling. I'm like, oh my God, it's so slimy and weird. But then, like, I think we spent the rest of this 2-week camp thing, like, just kissing the entire time. Like, it was like,
wow.
I never wanted to stop kissing. It was the coolest, most beautiful feeling. And I just wanted to do it all the time. I never wanted to stop. And I think we made out the whole time.
Wow.
Yeah, it's cool.
That's so sweet.
What about yours? What's your first?
Well, I was older. I was 16. And I had kind of developed this crush and like romantic thing with this boy. His name was Tim. I know his last name, but I'm not going to say it. And he had been a senior at my high school when I was a freshman. And then a year later, he was going to school at Cal Arts, and I was a sophomore, and we had built this, this relationship. It wasn't like a relationship, but like, this dynamic via AIM, AOL Instant Messenger, and we finally went on a date. It was my first date, and we went to the Century City Mall, which
was by our house.
Which is right by between our houses.
Between houses, yeah.
Yeah. The Century City Mall, back when it was like a quaint outdoor mall and not like the space station that it is now, with a Tesla store. And we went to see Wallace and Gromit, and two of my friends, I later found out, had gone to the same movie to like see if they could see us, my friends Meg and Alana. So we went to Wallace and Gromit, and then we went to Johnny Rockets for dinner. Do you remember Johnny Rockets? In that food court with the green chairs. I remember it so vividly. I even remember the shirt I was wearing. It was a Michael Stars orange tank top. And so we went to Johnny Rockets, and when I get nervous, and I have not grown out of this, when I go on a date, I get so nervous. I get sick to my stomach. I get nauseous. I have to like run to the bathroom, and I completely lose my appetite. But I didn't know this yet because this was my first date. So I didn't know why I was nervous. I just thought I was sick. I just was like, I don't know, there's something wrong with me. I don't feel well. I'm nauseous. And so I was like sitting there, slowly trying to eat these like French fries and burger. And I was like, I think I got to go home. Like, I don't feel so good. And he was like, okay. And thankfully my parents were pretty chill. And so we went into the family room, and we turned on Saturday Night Live, and it was the episode where Catherine Zeta-Jones was hosting, and she did this Chicago parody. I remember this so vividly. Wow. Yeah, and my parents had this green couch, and we were on the couch, and then I was still not really feeling well. And then you know what? It's funny, my memory cuts out when the kiss was like initiated. Like, I don't remember the kiss being initiated. And
he was with you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we were together. We were just on the couch, sitting next to each other, and I don't remember how it happened. I don't remember if he asked or what, but we started kissing, and I remember just being like, whoa, like, that's a mouth, and that's a tongue, and like, those are teeth, just like kind of having this like really mechanical understanding of what was happening. And then we ended up like laying down and like making out a little bit, and it was cute and sweet, but I remember just feeling like almost not in a traumatic way, but a little bit dissociated in the sense that I was like watching myself, and I was like observing what was happening, because I don't think that I was very present in my body. And obviously now, like, knowing about the way that my body like deals with nerves being just, it kind of like shuts off. That's probably what was going on. I was just a little bit like panicked about it. But he was super sweet. And then nothing really came of it. I think we like burst the tension bubble, but there was a little bit of like a hubbub at school because he was older than me. And there were like people who were between us in age who were like coming up to me being like, are you like, is this okay? And stuff like that. And I remember just being like, yeah, like, it's fine. I like him, and he's sweet, and whatever. Anyway, yeah, that was my first kiss.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to ask you about your like family unit. So
I have a co-parent partner of 18 years now, almost 18 years. No, almost 19 years. And we ended our romantic relationship 2.5 years ago, or 2 years ago. and still are very close friends, and raise our daughter together, but in separate living places. We live separately. Um, and our daughter is 12, almost 13. She's awesome. Um, and I am non-monogamous, and have a partner who also has a younger daughter. And so there's sort of this like slow kind of family combining with these extended, you know, I wouldn't really call it a polycule, just because there's not a lot of connection or communication. Like my
Between the two of them, right? There
right, they're
a
metamors. They're
relationship?
metamors, but they're not. They don't really have a relationship. I also have met Emily's ex, also co-parent. Also, they have a really wonderful and great relationship. It's been really important to everyone to maintain a strong sense of family, um, and also understand that relationships morph and grow into different situations.
And your
And
kids have a relationship,
our
correct?
kids do have a
Yeah.
relationship, yeah. And I think they met like 4 months ago.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it's been pretty recent. And so it's really developing. And we've been taking everything really slowly, and really putting our kids' experience with all of this at the forefront as much as we can,
Mm.
um, so that it just feels uh, conscious, which is kind of an overused word a little bit right now. Like the conscious decoupling,
Right.
you know,
The
thing
conscious
that,
kid, the conscious parent.
yeah, I feel like it's a little bit overused, but the sentiment is true.
Yeah.
Um, and really wanting to sort of design the experience for our children in the proper way, so that they feel a sense of, you know, connection between their real parents, you know, between their biological parents, um, and still a sense of sort of unity and family,
Mm.
um, and uh, and at the same time allowing room for this new, you know, the new relationship that enters in. In terms of the other non-monogamy stuff, we don't really communicate about that too much with our kids, and you know, our
Mm.
kids are 6 and 13, and so we keep everything as age appropriate as we can, while being as transparent as we can, while also just keeping the boundary of like, we're the adults and the parents, and the kids are the kids, and you know, we are actually needing to set firm boundaries and structures in the parent-child relationship as well.
Mm.
And so it's really been, it hasn't always been easy, um, but it's really been the work has really been worth it. It's been really worth it. And also, this type of situation is different for everyone. And so I think there is no real right or wrong way. I mean, there's certainly wrong ways to do things. I don't
Yeah.
think there's any one right way to do it. This is sort of the values that my co-parent and I have, and the values that my partner and her co-parent has, um, you know, with her family. I feel like we're really trying to be guided by what our values are, and also what we want to impart to our children about communication, openness, uh, love, and the different types of love that exist in the world. Um, and so, without revealing too much about my other partners and, you know, what they, just trying to keep it sort of from my own experience. That's kind of a general view of the landscape, and definitely ask me any questions that you have more specifically about any of that.
Well, I'd love to bring it back to the division of labor,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to, I think when people decouple and there's a child, you actually have to become a lot more specific about the division of labor in your families. than you do when like everyone's living under the same roof, right? Because there's times in your life where you are responsible for that child, like because they are in your physical presence. And then there's times when you are, of course, still like mentally and emotionally responsible for them, but they're not in your home and they're not, you know, face to face with you. So yeah, can you speak a little bit about like how that work, like familial work, changed for you, and the process of like being very deliberate about it, and the ways that you've kind of made that work for you?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think part of the separation with my co-parent from our romantic relationship, it was a long separation. It was like 2 years of us really, with some therapy and like really trying to, and so fortunate that we were in the position that we could be in, that we were able to go to therapy. I feel like we're really in a privileged position in terms of like what we were able to do in order to help with the guidance that we had to help us through the transition. So I think from my own personal perspective, there was a lot of realization about like what was really unequal in the relationship. And a lot of that was on me, actually. And so there was a lot of like, it was on both of us, and there's different areas and different facets that we were each responsible for. But it was a very kind of shocking look at my own behavior, and my own, not behavior, but sort of like just the way that our lives over 17, 16 years at the time just kind of, fell into a particular type of pattern. And I don't think that anyone was doing anything on purpose to, nothing was
Take
malicious.
advantage,
Yeah,
or yeah.
nothing was really malicious, but at the same time, emotional labor, physical labor in households, all of that stuff, who was working more and who was not. Like I was out in the world working more. Her work was more, she works in a position where people send her their work and she can work from home. And so, that kind of comes with its own set of like not being out in the world. And so there was a lot of, emotional and actual physical, like just running a household, like requires a certain, a big degree of physical labor. And as Dan Savage says, it's the relay race of parenting, and raising a child. It's just a continual relay race. And so there was some real wake up calls for me in terms of like my own responsibility, and uh, and I think that was really amazing, really important. And so I feel like the labor is much more equal now, and especially because we're not, because we have separate households and we're not living together. Actually, things we part of our mission now is to make our division of time with our daughter and sort of what we do as equal as we can, as equal as like, as physically possible. It won't always be, exactly 50-50 down the middle, but we really try to work to do that. And so in terms of, the time split with our daughter, what we're doing, what we're paying for, like we really try and have it be exactly even. And I feel very blessed and lucky to have a partner, a co-parent who is on, we are, I would say, for the most part on the same page about so many things. No two people will ever be on the same page about everything, obviously, but I feel like for the real, like the value pieces, like the very important things, where our values align in terms of how we want to raise our daughter, what we want to impart to our daughter about our separation, how we live our lives now, how we want to, we have dinner together once a week, we still go on vacations together, we still are familial and a family, even though we're not romantically entwined in each other's lives anymore. And I feel like it's enabled us to grow in a lot of ways that I don't know if it would have been possible otherwise. And become new people to really evolve and not sort of be, you know, I felt like we were both stuck, and it was not easy becoming unstuck. It was painful, like a lot of pain, and a lot of work. There was a lot of work on both of us, you know, in terms of like, it was a big labor of love in order to be able to separate in a kind way. And that was also very important to us to do that. And so, yeah, it was kind of a long-winded, meandering response. Did I answer the question? I think I
Yeah,
did.
no,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, that was very thorough, I think. I'm wondering what kind of labor you find like comes most naturally to you, and then where it is that you feel like maybe you find yourself a little more uncomfortable, or where you find yourself like wanting to work to kind of improve in what areas you find labor comes easily, and where it's more difficult.
I'm really into like processing. And so I feel like something that comes easy for me is like talking about shit for a long time, you know, and figuring it out and getting into it. I feel like what I learned through this process is how to look at myself in a different way, and to allow someone's criticism of me, or, you know, a problem that someone might have with the way I do something, to actually hear it and to actually take that in and to process it and say, okay, you know, this is an area where maybe I fell short for this particular person, and I can do better, I can improve. And so I feel like in terms of processing, talking, I feel like I've become almost fearless in that. Like, I'm not afraid to really get into it. I'm not afraid to have something about myself pointed out, and for me, and to look at it and say, like, I can self-correct if I need to, or I can adjust in order to
Yeah.
accommodate what needs to happen. That doesn't mean that you need to change yourself at every moment to anyone's, you know, there's obviously like a keel, and that you need to have, like, you know, kind of a gravitational center that you have into the earth, which is, you know, you and your space and your boundaries. But at the same time, in something that's a delicate negotiation, which is like parenting is a very delicate negotiation, there's a lot of give and take and opening yourself to different perspectives, and it's not always easy. And so, remind me, remind me your question. I feel like I got a little off
Oh,
track.
like what kinds of work in relationships like comes most easily to you, and where
Right,
you think
right.
there's room for improvement.
Yeah,
But what
yeah.
you're talking about, I think is, you know, the like we are fundamentally relational beings. Like we learn about ourselves in relation to other people, and that's why, like, as babies we learn what is not my body by like putting my hand in my mouth and being like, I feel that, and then like
Mm-hmm.
putting this cup in my mouth and being like, oh, that's not
Mm-hmm.
me, right? And then like as we get older it gets subtler and subtler, and it's like we learn about ourselves by the people and the experiences that we have in, like, that we're in close proximity to. And so what you're talking about is this kind of like personal flexibility around, you know, finding that balance between accommodating other people and their needs while maintaining your strong sense of self. And I think a lot of, and I think we've talked about this, like a lot of the work that comes from training to be an intimacy coordinator has everything to do with getting in touch with your own boundaries and your own core, and so that you can be present and available to other people and their needs, even when you can't necessarily, you can empathize even if you struggle to sympathize, maybe. Like, even if you've never had that experience, that you can start to recognize, like, oh, this person is having this experience. I can see it on their face. I can see it in their body. I can see it in their eyes.
I think that's exactly right. And I think that
Yeah.
being able to understand yourself and how you might respond in a particular situation allows you to get into that empathetic state that can even transition into compassion,
Right.
so that you can extrapolate what another performer might be going through, particularly in a sensitive scene, like an intimate scene, any
Right.
sort of nudity, simulated sex, intimacy on screen or on stage, I feel like is a more vulnerable position than any of us ever really give enough credit to. It's a very vulnerable state to be in on a set
Right.
because you have to perform, you have to get it right, and you also have to, be exposing yourself in a particular way.
Right, and extremely present. I think something that's come up for me a lot throughout this work is that I think that when we're taught what empathy is, it's like put yourself in the other person's shoes. But I actually think that true empathy is one step deeper than that, one step farther than that, which is that, or further than that, which is that it's not how would I feel in the situation that Yehuda is in right now. It's knowing what I know of Yehuda. How is Yehuda feeling in this situation right now? Because we can also, that comes up when we're like offering help, right? Or like advice to people, where it's like, we don't necessarily want to help people the way that we want to be helped. We want to help people the way that they want to be helped. We don't want to give advice that we need to hear. We want to give advice that the other person needs to hear. But so often we are just thinking like, how would I feel if I were there? And I think that comes up in the Wheel of Consent, which I'll put a link in the show notes to that, which is that in the serving and accepting dynamic, you can actually serve non-consensually by insisting that someone needs your help, or insisting on helping in the way that you want help, but not the way that they want help.
Let's break down the Betty Martin Wheel of Consent for a second for the listeners, so that they don't so that they can know what we're talking about, because it's so great. It's such a game changer.
I don't know I've been working on trying to figure out how to explain it without visual aids.
This is how I do it. Can I explain
you do
it? Yeah.
You do it.
So
please.
you're walking through the park and you see someone giving someone a massage, and you feel like there's a giver and there's a receiver. And that person is getting a massage and that person is giving a massage. And the assumption is that the person getting the massage is the person receiving, and the person giving massage is giving. And
the gift.
Of the gift.
Of the gift as well as the action.
Right, exactly. The gift of the massage. And so what this, woman, Betty Martin, put together with the Wheel of Consent is that the person giving the massage might be deriving as much pleasure from the giving as the person receiving the massage.
Or more pleasure.
In fact, the person giving the massage might be like giving a really hard massage because that's what feels good to them. And the receiver might be like, oh, that doesn't feel good. That's too hard, or something like that. And so it's this idea that when you give and when you receive, that there are different quadrants of how you give and receive. You can give in order to be receiving yourself. And so there's all of these really cool exercises that you can do inside of. Those are great to practice with your partner or partners.
The 3-minute game?
The 3-minute game is fantastic. Yeah. It's so wonderful. Might be, how could we do a virtual 3-minute game, actually? That's so interesting.
We should talk about that after this. So I've been thinking a lot.
I feel like I've missed something in there.
No, I think what was missing that to me was that it's about, you can give and receive an action, and you can give and receive a gift, and the gift is like the question is, who is it for? So the gift is about who it's for. So you can give an action and give the gift, but you can also give an action and receive the gift. So it could be that you can give the gift but receive the action, and you can receive both the action and the gift.
Right. And so I have a wide bandwidth for emotional labor, like for getting in there, for processing, for talking. And I actually feel unsettled. When things are unsettled, I feel unsettled. And so maybe it's even slightly selfish to want to process something until it feels like, okay, like I cannot stand going to bed. I mean, obviously sometimes you have to put things down and pick them up later. But I just can't stand, going to sleep feeling unsettled with, a partner, or feeling like there's some, there's hard feeling or static. And that just happens. Like, that's life. That happens sometimes. So I feel like that's the type of labor that I feel really down to do. Like, I'm really down to like look at myself and course correct, and to uh, understand how my actions might be affecting someone else. And sometimes I'm not aware of that. And a lot of people aren't. Um,
Yeah.
and then I'm trying to think of the laborious things that I don't like to do. I feel like now that I live alone, I'm continually cleaning. And I
Yeah.
realize that that's something that I was not doing. I was not sharing the load in housework and cleaning when my co-parent and I were living together. And I didn't even realize it. And it's something that was
Right.
like it was like invisible to me. And that's something that I'm now appreciative of, and I also kind of feel bad about. And I also feel like that's like, I don't know, there's some like, the it's not even residue. It's like the echoes of traditional gender roles that have just, that
Totally.
have, just reverberate in our society, that are part of the fabric of our life, that a lot of people can't really see through or look at, because it's invisible. It's part of like the invisible. So many things that were now with the coronavirus, and for example, so many things that were invisible to us are now becoming visible. Like,
Right.
I'm an experiential designer for
Right.
commercials. Like, people can't be together. Like, now what? I do a lot of
Yeah.
digital stuff as well. So I feel like, there's so many ways to experience covers so many different things. However, the point is that a lot of things that we take for granted and that we don't even see how they function,
Right.
um, suddenly are revealed. And so I feel like, you know, it, it's kind of mundane to say, but I feel like there was a lot of just like, childcare stuff and like house stuff that just kind of happened anyway without my input, and so became invisible. And then I just relied on those things. And I feel like being more self-sufficient and living alone and having, long periods of time where I need to take care of my, daughter on my own. I never feel like I'm totally on my own, but like, as a single parent, um, become more clear to me, have become more clear to me. Um, but I'm still trying to think of the stuff that I don't like to do. It might take someone else having to point that out for me, as
Right.
opposed to me understanding what it is. I'm trying to think of like stuff that I'm, emotional or any other type of labor that like I'm down for and that I'm not down for. I'm not down for it in general, like carrying an emotional load for someone else who can't really look at themselves and can't also
Right.
step up and, take responsibility for their part in the thing. That happens to me more professionally than it does in my personal life. I feel like I surround myself with people who I can go deep with and sort of get, like be on a similar sort of value page with in my personal life. Professionally, it's unavoidable. You're going to encounter so
Right.
many people who come from so many different backgrounds, who have so many different levels of awareness of their lives, of how they affect other people, that it's a real sort of, I see it as, uh, I guess a martial arts metaphor would be Aikido, where like, like this energy is coming at you and you having to do a lot of sort of like redirecting in order to maintain a sense of sort of like balance and harmony. Um,
Right.
and so it's hard to tolerate that, especially in my personal life. People who, you know, won't look at themselves and won't, you know, agree to even look at themselves. I feel like for me is sort of a non-starter. Um,
Right.
in terms of personal relationships. And so that's where I do draw a line in terms of like having to do a lot of labor and work for other people. And I've certainly been in situations that way where I feel like I'm doing a lot of work for other people emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you on that one. I can have so much compassion for someone who is very different from me and who's maybe struggling with certain things, but I lose patience when they're not willing to look at themselves and not
Hmm.
willing to like do the work to, even look at the ways that they're unknowingly asking for help and service. I think back to the wheel, like that's the entitled shadow side of the accepting quadrant, right? Where it's like, if you aren't willing to look at the ways that you are asking people around you to do labor for you, to serve you, then they run out of that generosity component, because all they're
Hmm.
doing, they start to feel like you expect it. And there's this entitlement piece. So in wrapping up, I just want to ask you for three people or media, whether it's books or movies or whatever it is, that have been very formative for you and that you can sort of tie to getting to this exact point in your life, whether that's your career or your personal life or your creative life.
I feel like in my early theater making days, I was fortunate enough to see the work of a theater director, auteur really, named Reza Abdo, in the early 90s in New York. And that absolutely changed my life when I saw those pieces. He was an Iranian born director who had AIDS, and it was like the height of the AIDS crisis. I mean, it was like full blown AIDS mode then. This is like 90, 91, 92. Sorry, I had to switch my headphones. And so in he was like the Fellini of the theater world in a way.
Mm.
His work was so uh, dense and raw, and he had this. I mean, it was everything. It was like I'm gonna get all sort of stuttery and tongue tied about it because it was actually so meaningful to me and it influenced me so intensely in my early days. His work is on YouTube now, actually. His name is Reza, Reza Abdo, Abdoh. Um, it's like early 90s videos of like kind of his pieces were immersive in a way, but just because they took place in like various warehouses with different stages and you had to like audience had to travel, they were really visceral, really intense. They were a lot about him being gay and Iranian and dying of AIDS in a culture that accepted none of those things. Um, and his work was beautiful and it really changed my life. It was a huge, huge, huge influence on me, and particularly my early theater work. And I think that what was the most moving to me is he had so much to actually say.
Mm.
And I feel like there's a lot of art in the world and there's a lot of, people with opinions and people making things that maybe they have something to say. Some people do, some people don't. He had such a conviction in his voice, in his theatrical voice, and he was so angry, and political too, and that sort of political rage and anger that came out in his voice became such a beautiful mouthpiece for him. It was like this fuel that was like such a it led to these moments of like ecstasy and beauty in a theatrical setting where like you're moved, and his performers were unbelievable. It was like the way that he was able to command this group of like, completely, gender bend. This is like early 90s, like gender bendy, like non-binary, like the whole, it was like a punk rock trans aesthetic in a
Mm.
way, and it was really formative for me. It was honest and raw and beautiful, and it was uh, and there was a lot of anguish in it, and just this like the unfairness of like of dying and dying. Uh, I don't know. There's so I can go on and on about Reza. There's so much to say about it, and it was really that was very formative, and that was in the early '90s for me. Um, And then that's a really tough question that you ask there. Like who are like the three like uh formative people in my life. I was friends with a sculptor named George Noble who died a few years ago. And I met him when he was 65, I think. Um, and he kind of became this like father figure, mentor, grandfather figure to me in New York. And I cast him in some of my shows of my theater company. And he really took care of me. He made me dinner. We would smoke hash together. He was a sculptor and a performer a little bit. Not really a performer, but that's why it was really fun to cast him in things. Um, and he was really like he was like like kind of a benefactor to my work. Not a I mean, that's like the lamest way to put it. He was a really close friend, and also just so supportive of me and my work that I was making at the time in New York City. Um, I think there was a year where I was just working on one show and didn't really have any other jobs, and he helped support me. He would help build sets. He was an amazing carpenter too. And we would hang out a lot. And I think there was a lot of symbiosis in the relationship. I think he got a lot out of, he got a lot of sort of energy and vitality, I hope, from hanging out with me. But, we hung out a lot. And he was really a, 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 a benevolent force in my life, who was just supportive, like unquestioningly supportive of the work that I wanted to do, and believed in me. Like he really believed in me in this way that was really beautiful and irreplaceable. And I miss him. His name was George Noble.
I'll look him up.
Fantastic guy. There's not much on him online. A little bit. I think some of his work is somewhere. I have a few of his pieces around here, actually.
Oh.
And so George, and that's a real personal one, like, and he was so funny in our shows too. We would always dress him up in like it was really funny. And he had an accent. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was a child Holocaust survivor. He escaped Hungary in his father's backpack as like a 4-year-old.
Oh my God.
and moved to Chile. And like had to get through Europe to take a boat to Chile. It was like a really incredible story. And yeah, so I think George, and then
one more person or media.
I kind of want to say the obvious thing, which is like my mom was like super, like
Sure, why not?
really sort of wonderful mom. My parents are from Israel, and we would go to Israel every summer to visit my family. And so my mom would, take me on archaeological digs, and she would give me tours of Jerusalem, and take me to sort of all of the quarters. We went into the Dome of the Rock together, which was the, Muslim holy site in Jerusalem. So I feel really, and also just she's such a curious person, my mom. And this is so, I feel like everyone would say their mom. Maybe not.
No.
Maybe not everyone. No, not everyone would say it.
I think there's also a lot of people who like love their mom but don't find that she was necessarily formative for their like creative or professional life,
Yeah, I think my mom has been really influential, inspirational. I think that she has like a continual thirst for inhaling culture, like to a point where I'm like, I don't want to go to another museum. But like, we were fortunate enough to be able to travel a lot when I was young because my parents' moved to LA after the, 2 wars in Israel. They didn't want to, I think that part of it was they didn't want to live in that kind of continual war state anymore. And so moved to Los Angeles, but their whole family was in Israel. And so we traveled to Israel a lot. And so from there, I was able to go to Egypt and Jordan, and, just to really kind of understand some, obviously I have a certain perspective, to see the culture of the Middle East in a particular way. Um, and, and also she just really has a thirst for the world and for travel. And so is able to really, travel a lot and extensively around the world as a kid, and to really see a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different ways that people lived. And there was something really fearless, I mean, still, but there's something very sort of fearless about her in a way. Um, she was also an officer in the army, which I think is kind of badass.
Wow.
Um, and and yeah, I think my mom is a really huge positive, uh, maternal force in my life, artistically, culturally, and also just in from like a maternal caring perspective. And I feel like I have an intense maternal side to me, actually.
Yeah,
And that I think comes from my mom. And so I'm really thankful for her.
I can confirm that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted you to talk a little bit about the way that you see intimacy coordination as an art form. Because for me, we can just talk about how we feel a little bit, how it's like a different medium for both of us. For me, it's really about boundaries, and like that's what was so impactful for me about this training, and what continues to move me and gratify me in this work is like helping people find their boundaries, learning about my own boundaries, and then sharing with them ways to communicate them and express them, and navigate them in the world. I've found that with a lot of people that I work with, the feedback that I get after the fact when I'm still in touch with them is that it actually helped them like in their lives. It really like rippled outward. So that's where that work is like so significant and meaningful to me. But I'm super interested in your experience with it as an art form in and of itself.
So I fell into intimacy coordination kind of by accident in 2007. And I was directing a play by a playwright named Thomas Bradshaw, that had really the most insanely graphic sex scenes written into the stage directions that everyone was like, how can we possibly do this? Really respected playwright. All of the performers were really excited about being in the show, but everyone was like wide-eyed and freaked out about how are we ever going to stage this stuff. And so the first thing that I came up with this cast was to say, you know what? We're going to talk about it a lot, but we're not going to touch it for at least 2 weeks. Like, we're not going to be staging it. We're going to do a lot of table work around it. We're going to get to know each other. We're going to stage other parts of the play. We're going to get on our feet. We're going to get to know each other. But I don't want you to feel like, number one, surprise, we're doing a sex scene today. Like, number one, I felt like everything, I really wanted them to feel comfortable. And so I love your perspective of boundaries coming into it. I feel like it's the foundation of the work in a way. And I feel like when everyone understands what the boundaries of the art that you're trying to make is, the boundaries of what the personal boundaries are, the interrelational personal boundaries are, and then the boundaries of the production as a whole are, everyone can kind of like relax and like get into doing the work. And so I think that that's really foundational. Then there's like, for me, the really fun stuff, which is the storytelling and like, how are we going to do this? Like, we all understand, the script and like what is called for and what is necessary. We understand what the playwright wants. We understand what the script calls for. If we're on a movie set, we understand what the director wants. Sometimes you're on a set where a director is like, I feel really uncomfortable with these sex scenes, you do it. And
Right.
other times a director is like, I know exactly what I want. And so, that's the idea of like, the overarching idea of like what it is that we're making, like what is this work of art? I see all these pieces as like work, an artwork or an art piece. And so I feel like, and there's also 100 million ways to tell a story. And I feel like as a storyteller and as a director, I'm into intimacy in general. Like that's like a thing. It's like a kind of a hallmark of all of the different and work that I've done has to do with intimacy. And so bringing the idea of intimacy to performers, to the stage or to the screen, I feel like it's this really kind of like wonderful, holy expression of self. I don't know. I really love it. And so, and, you know, once everyone's comfortable, once everyone knows what we want to do, we know like what we're trying to do artistically. We've set what our personal boundaries are. I don't want to be touched here. I'm fine being touched here. You understand me, I understand you. There's really good communication around how we're making stuff. Then it becomes this like really wonderful, playful experience of, would it be hot if I did this? Would this look cool? Would that look cool? And it's a performance in a way. It's a performance of either intimacy or nudity or sexuality. And things are changing now, but for the most part, most of the sex that we see in media, I feel like is almost the same. Like there's a lot of sameness about it. And so that's not my experience in the world of sexuality. I feel like everyone is so different. Everyone is so unique. Everyone is so particular about their own sexuality, how they relate to people, what it's like before, during, and after. Like everyone is completely different. And so I feel like this idea of representation is really wonderful and important. And with this there is so much sex on television and film. It's, it's something that sells lots of things. It's like a selling point. It's something as a culture and society, particularly in America, that we are really interested in. Maybe because we've been so repressed about it for so long, and we've become from, this like, the reverberations of the Puritans somehow are still with us. And so we have to, find all of whatever. There's a lot of different things that we can talk about in there. And so I feel like finding the ways to storytell around what people's sexuality is, and maybe a little bit more close to what it actually is, I feel like is really interesting. And so in most of the things that I do, I like to throw in a little moment of awkwardness. Like it's always awkward when you're taking your pants off because your cuffs get stuck on your socks, like that just happens. And it's not something that we see in media. But I love those moments. I think they're so human. And so I feel like, and there's just something so fundamentally human about intimacy. It's something that we need. We're feeling it now in this, pandemic where we're so isolated from each other. And so, everything is storytelling and everything is fiction in a way in these situations. And so when I say a realistic representation, like not everything is real, but what we are getting to are real emotions and things that we actually feel. Another thing that I've always said is that, this playwright's stage directions, Thomas Bradshaw, one of the stage directions where he glides his penis gently in and out of her.
Whoa.
And so obviously you're not going to show that on stage, like there's no situation on a stage in a professional theater where you're going to show exactly that. And so my line always has been, since I started this work in 2007, was that you don't have to see it, but you have to feel it.
Right.
The audience has to feel these things. And so it's a really wonderful way of storytelling. It's real, it's fake, it's intimate, it's personal, it's performative, it's vulnerable, it's fun. There's so many, and it's a challenge too. And I feel like the being sort of the facilitator of this, like getting people on the same page, getting people feeling comfortable with each other. Like every set that I've been on, people have told me that, I don't know, they've learned something new about personal communication. They've learned something new about, relational things, about consent, about boundaries. And there's so many ways to make something like hot and fun. I'll give another example. I just worked on a film where the nudity riders were that no one really wanted to show much flesh. And so great. No one wanted to show. There was going to be no, back nudity was fine. Cleft of the buttocks was fine. Side boob was okay as long as there was no nipple. Like there was just a lot of, no frontal nudity, no nipple, no pubic region. And so, okay, great. Like, what are we going to do then to make this scene really hot and wonderful, but without showing anything? And so we were able to really find a lot of, like, what I did for that particular, this one particular scene was I really amplified the kissing. So I made the kissing more. They were totally fine. These two women were totally fine kissing each other. And so we worked a little bit on it too, because it was one person's first time kissing another person of the same sex. What we did was we really amplified the kissing and made the kissing really graphic and hot. Like they were sucking on each other's tongues and like laying in bed and like kind of laughing and like doing all this kind of like stuff that was really graphic with their mouths. And I feel like that then translated into what we weren't showing is, I feel like, is as powerful as what you are showing in a way.
Totally.
Can be more powerful, because I feel like the most powerful tool that we have as artists and makers is the imagination of our viewers. And so if you can really spark the imagination of your viewer, it almost becomes more powerful than anything you can just graphically show in a way.
Yeah, it's like, I feel the same way about like silence in dialogue, it's like if you can make what you don't see like richer, it can often be a lot more interesting than what you can see. That's something that I do think about in my personal life, about sex and intimacy as a creative form of self-expression for me. And that's something that I am, grappling with currently. Like I don't have that creative outlet right now. And that's something that I miss. And I'm sort of looking for where I can find that flow, now that I'm a shut-in, basically.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think for my, to move this from the professional realm, the intimacy coordination as a professional realm does not, like, that's its own encapsulated bubble. And like personal sexuality does not really, aside from perspective and aesthetic, does not enter into that world. Like they're separated. Flipping into my own personal life and like putting intimacy coordination aside and flipping into my own personal life, I totally agree with that. I feel like for me, sexuality is a really fundamental creative expression. And it's like, I feel like it's not a lot of people say, oh, sexuality fuels your artwork. Like in a way,
No,
it's for me, like it kind of is the artwork
Yeah.
in a way. I feel that way as well. It then also does fuel the rest of life in a way. And it certainly does fuel creativity. But yeah, I really do feel that like sexuality and sexual expression is, it's definitely like an art form and one that I enjoy practicing.
Yeah. But even like the language that we use around it, like being turned on, like you can think about that rippling outward from simply like physically turned on into like mentally turned on, like stimulated in all of your senses, and having that reverberate throughout your life, that, when you experience the feeling of being turned on more, it does impact more than just, your physical experience.
Totally.
Well, thanks, Yehuda.
Thank you so much.
I think that's it.
Okay, good. Thanks, Mia.
Yeah, thank you. You can find Yehuda on Instagram or on his website at xxxyehuda.com. I'm on Instagram at Mia Schachter, SCHACHTER. You can follow the podcast at Share the Load Podcast. Special thanks to Pete Szijarto at Director Pete on Instagram for recording, editing, and producing help. And thanks to Tyler Field for the music. You can reach me at podcast@sharetheloadinc.com.
Thanks, Mia.
Thanks, Yehuda.